August 10th, 2019. Jeffrey Epstein is found lifeless in a federal cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The U.S. government officially classified it as a self-inflicted end. Years later, the Department of Justice released over 3 million files from the case. Hidden among them was a photograph of a handwritten note found inside his cell. At the top, in his handwriting, jail out equals 10. He was gone by the 10th. The rest of the page is a list: wire transfers, flight codes, a fake name, a route out. Soon enough, the skies over Iran lit up and this note disappeared. This note was recovered from cell 220 of the Special Housing Unit, where Epstein spent his final night. The line, jail out equals 10, coinciding with the exact date he vanished, is hard to ignore. But the back of the page is where the real work was being done. The first thing worth stopping on is a single letter with 3 exclamation marks beside it. K. Does the K stand for Karina? Karina Shuliak was Epstein's longtime girlfriend and the named beneficiary of the 1953 trust he signed into existence that same week. 2 days before Epstein's end, $50 million moved from his accounts to her. 20 minutes before the cameras went dark, he made a phone call, the prison logged as going to his mother. It was unmonitored, which federal inmates do not usually get. His mother had been dead for 15 years. Reports suggest the call went to Karina. 7 years later, nobody in the official record seems especially interested in where Karina Shuliak is today. Further down the page, a short list of countries: Israel, Saudi Arabia. Israel has an open record of sheltering convicted felons from extradition. And it is where his mentor, Robert Maxwell, was buried under a state funeral attended by Israeli prime ministers and intelligence officials. For an asset of that world, Israel is not a country on a list. It is the end of the route. And the route had an Austrian passport. Real document, fake identity, made out to a man named Marius Robert Fortelny. The face inside was Epstein's. The stated country of residence was Dammam, Saudi Arabia. In the lower corner, a rough sketch of a low-wide building labeled Brad. Could it be Bradley International, a private aviation hub in Connecticut? But the sketch itself bears resemblance to the layout of Teterboro Airport. It is 40 minutes away and 16 miles across state lines from the MCC. Teterboro is an absolute cornerstone of the Epstein investigation. The airport surfaces in the Epstein files over 7,000 times. Epstein actively cultivated relationships with customs officials to bypass standard immigration and security controls for his passengers. Teterboro was the central travel hub of his trafficking ring. According to court filings, he frequented the small airport to deliver dozens of young victims to his wealthy friends, including royals and politicians. Teterboro is also where the FBI famously intercepted the Lolita Express and arrested him on July 6, 2019. Next to it, jet versus prop. A jet would be faster. A prop plane would be quieter, lower, and harder to track. He was weighing the two. Higher up, 2 names with question marks. Mara, read as Judge Kenneth Mara, who signed off on the 2008 deal that let him spend 13 months in a county jail for what should have been federal prison. Nicole, read as Nicole Junkerman, a financier whose name has surfaced in reporting on Israeli intelligence circles. Nearby, MIAUS, red notice, government clear. Epstein was thinking through the aftermath. What happens the moment the world starts looking? These are the bureaucratic levers for reclassifying a prisoner as missing, flagging him to Interpol, and ensuring he would never be found by the people paid to find him. Then the page turns inward, from countries and aircraft to the building he was sitting inside. Blankets. A VR Medi watch. An unusual pile of blankets was documented on his bunk the morning of the 10th. We also know for a fact the recording system covering his hallway suffered an unprecedented failure that exact night, making AVR look less like a random scribble and more like a completed task on a blackout checklist. Medi points to what happened next. Within 10 minutes of being found in his cell, Epstein was transported to a hospital, breaking protocol entirely, removing the most significant piece of evidence from the scene before any proper documentation could occur. Watch likely refers to the officer shift on duty, because at the very top of the front page, the word guards appears alongside blackmail and a $, which suggests the arrangement was paid for. Moving on, medical/PT. A medical transport is one of the few ways to leave a federal high security facility without the paperwork of a prisoner move. And then there is LSR, shorthand in the prosthetics industry for liquid silicone rubber, the material used in high-end life casting. Applied to a face, it photographs as skin. Hold on to those 3 letters. They come back when we look at the gurney photo. Read in sequence, this note sounds like a checklist. A way out of the money, a way out of the country, a plane, a name to fly under, a payroll, a medical pretext for leaving the building, and a face to leave behind for anyone who needed to see one. And for any of it to work, the federal high-security facility he was sitting inside had to stop functioning as usual, for a specific window of hours, which is what the footage from the night of August 9th appears to show. 2 days before his end, Epstein had one of the busiest administrative days of his life. On August 8th, 2019, he signed the paperwork creating the 1953 trust and moved $577 million into it. The camera system covering his unit began a documented failure starting that same day. U.S. Marshals notified the prison that his cellmate, Nicholas Tartaglione, would be transferred out the following morning. And a draft of the press statement announcing Epstein's death, written by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, was created and saved on August 9th, a full day before his body was found. The prison's own psychology department had left one standing order about Epstein that he was not to be left alone in a cell. On August 9th, his cellmate was removed and no replacement was assigned. That was the first rule broken. The second one was sitting on the guard's desk. Taped to it in block letters, a sign said, "Mandatory rounds must be conducted every 30 minutes on Epstein. As per God." 4 exclamation marks. This was not a suggestion. The guards on shift that night were Tova Noyle and Michael Thomas. From midnight to 6:30 a.m., they conducted 0 rounds. Cameras in the common area caught them sleeping at their desks and for a stretch of the shift, browsing the internet for motorcycle ads. Over those 6.5 hours, they signed multiple count slips claiming the checks had been done. Noyle and Thomas were the only people charged in connection with Epstein's death. Both took a deferred prosecution deal. Neither spent a day in jail. While the guards were asleep, other things were moving. At 10:39 p.m., a figure in orange clothing appeared on the stairwell leading up to Epstein's tier. The FBI called it an inmate being escorted. The Office of the Inspector General said it was a guard carrying linen. Tova Noyle, under questioning, said she had not distributed linen that night and could not recall what the figure was. It remains unidentified. Then there is the footage itself. When the FBI finally released the tape, they called it raw and unedited.
That's what's taken a while on this. We are working on cleaning it up to make sure you have an enhanced, and we're going to give the original so you don't think there were any shenanigans. You're going to see there's no one there but him.
Forensic analysts who examined the file found it had been exported through Adobe Premiere Pro. At 11:21 p.m. on the tape, a computer cursor flickers briefly on the screen. That does not happen with raw surveillance data, but when someone is screen recording a playback. The camera the FBI released was described as the only camera in the unit. The unit had 11. 9 of them had been reporting malfunctions starting the week Epstein arrived. Of the 2 that worked, one was positioned to cover a stairwell on an angle that left the entire right side approach to Epstein's cell invisible. A person could walk from the unit entrance to his cell without being on a single frame of video. At 4 a.m., a second figure entered the unit. Both guards are visible at their desks, unalarmed. The unit required a physical key held only by the 2 on duty. Someone else had the key. Within 10 minutes of the body being discovered on the morning of August 10th, the cell was disrupted. The body was moved and no site photographs were taken, a direct violation of Bureau of Prisons protocol for any in-custody death. By the time anyone on the outside was asking questions, there was nothing left to photograph, nothing on tape, and no one left to ask. The building had stopped functioning at exactly the right time, for exactly the right window, in exactly the right order, which now leaves the body itself. The official story is that Epstein hanged himself from the top bunk of cell 220 in a seated position, using a strip torn from his bedsheet. Let's start with the anchor point. The cell walls are built from standard cinder blocks, 8 inches per block. Forensic analysts counted the blocks in the published photographs and calculated the height of the alleged anchor point at 42 inches from the floor, kitchen counter height. Epstein was 6 feet tall. Seated on the floor, the bottom of his neck sits at around 30 inches. That leaves 12 inches of vertical space between the anchor and his neck. For the hanging to work, a bedsheet strip has to travel that 12 inches, form a knot, and still leave enough material to loop around the throat and pull taut when the body leans forward. 12 inches is not enough room for all of that. The sheet hangs slack. A slack rope produces no compression. No compression produces no injury. The body was sitting on the floor, not suspended. That does not produce the injuries described in the autopsy. The cell photographs also show a mattress on the lower bunk directly beneath the anchor point. If the body was seated on that mattress rather than the floor, the math gets even worse. Officer Michael Thomas said he cut Epstein down from the ligature. When questioned, he could not recall removing it. Officer Tova Noyle, who was present when the body was lowered, testified that she did not see a noose at all. What investigators eventually received for examination was a clean, tidy ligature, the kind you would tie in a workshop. What was actually documented inside the cell was a torn, jagged strip on the floor. Neither piece could be definitively linked to the notch on the bunk. The physics of the scene raise another contradiction. Epstein had sleep apnea wires in his cell. Sturdy, reliable, the kind of material a determined person would reach for. But the story claims he ignored them and reached for a strip of bedsheet instead. Then, there's the body again. Dr. Michael Baden, a senior forensic pathologist, observed Epstein's autopsy as an independent expert on behalf of the family. He found 3 fractures in the neck, the hyoid bone in both left and right thyroid cartilages. Baden stated on record that in all his years, he had never seen that combination in a self-inflicted case.
So in 1,000 cases that you've reviewed in the New York State prison system since Attica,
right,
you've never seen a 3-bone fracture in a side.
That's correct.
It is a pattern associated with manual or ligature strangulation, where pressure is applied across the front of the neck by another person. Baden also estimated the time of death, approximately 4:30 a.m., 4:30. Remember the camera footage from the night before? A figure entered the unit at 4 a.m. Both guards were visible at their desks and did not move. The death, by Baden's estimate, occurred 30 minutes after that entry. Now the most famous image in the case, the gurney photo. Lauren the mortician, a licensed embalmer, audited that photograph and found several things that do not match a deceased individual. The jaw is closed. In a person lying flat on their back, gravity pulls the jaw open unless muscle tone is still active. The eyes are full, reflective, hydrated. After death, the eyes flatten and lose moisture within minutes. The skin shows pink tones in the cheeks and chin. Whether that is because the person in the photo was still alive or because of what was written in that escape note, LSR, liquid silicone rubber, the material that holds shape for hours and photographs as skin, the gurney photograph does not follow the rules of death either way. Epstein's body was buried in an unmarked grave. A body doesn't break this many rules to hide what one man did. It does it to hide what one man knew. In 1974, a 21-year-old college dropout with no degree and no teaching credentials was hired to teach math at the Dalton School in Manhattan, an exclusive private school in the country. The man who hired Jeffrey Epstein was Donald Barr, a former OSS agent. A year before hiring Epstein, Donald Barr had published a science fiction novel called Space Relations. It was about oligarchs on a distant planet who kidnap and traffic children for a ruling elite. While Donald Barr ran Dalton, his son Bill Barr was working as a CIA legal liaison. 45 years later, Bill Barr was the Attorney General of the United States, running the Department of Justice that ran the prison where Epstein died. From Dalton, Epstein's path led to Robert Maxwell. Maxwell was one of the most significant Israeli intelligence assets of the 20th century. Maxwell introduced his daughter Ghislaine to Epstein and became his most powerful mentor. When Maxwell mysteriously died, Israel gave him a hero's state funeral attended by former prime ministers. Yitzhak Shamir stood at the service and said, "He has done more for the state of Israel than can now be told." The protection Maxwell had carried for decades appears to have extended to the man he had been grooming. Alexander Acosta, former U.S. attorney, signed the 2008 sweetheart deal that let Epstein walk free for crimes that carried a potential life sentence. Years later, in 2018, Acosta told journalist Vicky Ward that he had been told to back off because the subject belonged to intelligence and was above his pay grade. The United States has a documented history of protecting men like this. In 1983, the Department of Justice issued a formal apology for helping Klaus Barbie escape justice for over 30 years. Known as the Butcher of Lyon, Barbie was a Gestapo officer who had tortured and murdered thousands during World War II. After the war, American intelligence recruited him, used him, and when French prosecutors came looking, helped him disappear to Bolivia. They said it was done to protect national security and avoid embarrassment. The DOJ's own report called it good faith. No wonder the grave in Florida is unmarked, the files are redacted, and the culprits remain untouched, unlike their victims.